While we're on break, there was a question about earnest money. Yes, earnest money goes as a credit to the buyer. So if he has to bring 10% down, he already put 500, let's say, in earnest money. That would be part of his 10%, so he has to bring that. So earnest money is credited towards the buyer on the closing, which we're going to talk about in 3 more chapters. There are other reasons for contracts to get discharged. I think that one says Matt's name on it. Make sure. One of the forms. Partial performance, where one party accepts that the other one's completely done. Partial performance and substantial performance, you actually see a lot with new builds. All right, you get a home built in the winter, they can't sod the yard. So you could still close, and they're going to go, we'll come back in the spring and sod your yard, so let's close anyway because we're not completely done. Okay, it's partial, or it's substantial enough that I will accept it, but you still owe me something on the other side. Was there a question? No, you'll get to it. I hope. If I don't get to it, ask the question. If I don't get to it, I should have gotten to it. So partial performance is substantial, or happen a lot with like new builds. Impossibility of performance. Sometimes there's a contract written that literally can't happen. The best example that I have seen, while a tragedy, you do understand. Remember when the State Fair stage got destroyed and all the concerts the rest of that week of the State Fair were canceled? How does a band perform on stage if there's not a stage? All right? So that would be an example of an impossibility. It can't be held to that contract. Hey, it's not my fault. I was supposed to perform Thursday night. You were supposed to pay me, but we can't because there is no venue now.
So, to be clear, that would be in real estate, like if you offered and it was accepted for 140, but it only appraises for 120. That's an impossible.
The question is, if you accepted 140 and it appraised for 120, would that be an impossibility of performance? No. You just have to you agreed to pay 140, bank's going to pay 120, you got to pay the other 20. An impossibility would be more like I put a purchase agreement on a house that burnt down.
So that wouldn't void the offer?
No, most certainly would not. The appraisal has nothing to do with what you agreed to pay for something. All right? Now, we have a clause in ours that says if it doesn't meet the appraised value, either party can get out or you can adjust the value. A lot of those times that clause gets tried to get wiped out because they know they're selling it above the appraised value. But if that happens and it's appraised for 120, the bank says, yeah, we'll loan you the 120, but you agreed at 140, so you got to bring. That's exactly where watching the contracts come in. Know your contracts, which is why we started this. What did the contract say? Does it say you will pay any amount above it, or does it say it will terminate? Mutual agreement. The key word there is what? Mutual, because bilateral. We could both say, hey, I want out of this deal. And you could say, you know, I've actually found a buyer that's going to pay more. I want you out of this deal. Let's agree to terminate our purchase agreement. Sure. Remember, contracts can do anything as long as it fits those things. Operation of law, like a bankruptcy, might kill a purchase agreement. Definitely kills a listing agreement. And then the other one is a rescission. Remember, you can rescind an offer at any time before it's accepted or it dies or something like that. Here's our offer. No, it's not. Here's our offer. No, it's not. Come on, Charlie, kick the football. Whoop. There are many contracts that we use in real estate. Once again, there is not going to be a test question that says, name 6 contracts. Just understand we use the listing agreement, we have the option, we have an escrow agreement with our earnest money, we have a purchase agreement, we've got all kinds of contracts that we use. We may use an owner financing, which is a land contract, and we're going to talk here in just a second about that. But the contracts in general have to include certain things: price and terms, description of the property so you know what you're selling, the kind of deed you're delivering, general deed, warranty deed, special warranty deed. Most of this we have touched on a little bit, so I want you to jump all the way where we're going. 196, there's the offer, the acceptance, talked about. Yes? What is the statute of limitations for real estate in Indiana for breach? Is that the question? If they breach a contract, I am not a practicing attorney. I don't know. Depends where the breach is. Is it in the purchase agreement? Is it in the listing agreement? I don't know. I would assume that, I know some contract law is 3 years, criminal law is 7 years on certain things. So it kind of depends on where does that fall. If it's a fraud, like a criminal act, which is where your question's probably coming from, because I know some of your back, that might be a 7-year statute of limitation. If it's...
Statute of limitations is different for everything. I just didn't know if there was a blanket statute for real estate or not.
No, there is no blanket statute, because remember, you're dealing, like I said, it kind of depends. If the real estate you're dealing with is violating environmental law, that may be different than if it's violating contract law. So there is no statute that's blanket that you can say every real estate contract is 3 years. I don't know. All right, there's a word on page 196. It's called binder. Binder. This is a really terrible word. I want you to write in your book, and for those of you at home, write this in your book too, letter of intent. A lot of times, the slang version that you hear a lot of brokers call it is an LOI. Letter of intent. Let me tell you what this is. In the residential world, I told you earlier that we all use the same contract promulgated by the IAR, written by an attorney. So we don't write contracts. We fill in 27 blanks. In the commercial world, purchase agreements are so diverse that they write a purchase agreement brand new every time, because you're dealing with different things. Tenants on one, environmental issues on another, parking spaces. So they literally do have an attorney write a purchase agreement every time. Well, that is very problematic when you have to pay an attorney $200 or $300 an hour and you have 13 counteroffers back and forth. So what most commercial brokers do is play this game called a letter of intent, or for the book, binder, which basically is a hypothetical game that says, Kelsey, what if we offered you $1 million, we'll do the environmental, we'll split the title work, we'll close on Thursday wearing a blue turtleneck standing on her head. You think you'll take that offer? And she said, well, if you offered us 1.1 wearing a red turtleneck, we'd probably do that. Well, how about we don't have red? How about we do a green turtleneck? Would you do that? Yeah, we'll probably do that. What we have done is pre-negotiate all of the terms of this deal. But it's usually just a bullet point deal. It's not a contract. So now what I do is when we get all of these bullet points pre-negotiated, we go to an attorney and said, write me a purchase agreement, and I want it to include these 27 bullet points. So now he writes that contract. And I go back, I hand her the deal and say, here's our offer. And she goes, we accept this on the first time. Ta-da! That's because we pre-negotiated all the terms. All we have been doing was a letter of intent to make an offer. The reason the word binder's not a good word is because literally I could hand her the offer and she goes, yeah, we're not taking this. But we agreed. Yeah, but it's not a contract. It wasn't binding. It's a hypothetical game of what if. All right? It's designed to go between brokers as a, let's hammer all this out before we actually go under contract. It's my letter of intent to make an offer. You might even negotiate your commission on that as part of it, especially in the commercial world. All right, so LOI, or a letter of intent, instead of binder. Earnest money, and right across the page on 197's liquidated damages. I touched on this just a minute ago. Earnest money is a credit to the buyer. It is given typically to the listing agent to hold as earnest that they really want to do the deal. Because that means if they are in jeopardy of backing out, they would lose this money to compensate the seller for having his house off the property or off the market. That's in essence what it is. All right? If that money ends up somehow going to the seller as compensation, it actually becomes what's known as liquidated damages across the page on 197. Liquidated damages are what are awarded to the seller in case that there is a breach by the buyer. And like I said, sellers typically, and we say it, well, the seller's going to keep the earnest money. Not really, because the earnest money is a credit to the buyer. Seller's going to keep liquidated damage. And the judge most often says, it may be the equal amount. What are you holding, 500? Then I award 500, because that's the easiest number to give them. All right? So understand that earnest money is a credit to the buyer. If it becomes a seller's awarded funds, it is called liquidated damages to help bring the seller whole because he potentially lost other buyers while he was jacking around with you. Equitable title is what most buyers, not most, all buyers, get when a contract is formed. Equitable means I have an interest in the property. The buyer who is under contract to buy this house wants to make sure that the seller doesn't destroy the house in that 30 days it takes me to close. So I've got an interest in the property, or title. I've got equitable title. A lot of times you hear these interchangeable. Equitable interest, equitable title. I don't want you to let the property get destroyed. Mow the lawn. Don't put any health and hospital liens on it. Don't let it burn down. Don't remove your homeowner's insurance, all of that. Because while we are trying to close our deal, I have an interest in your property. And for you investors, that interest is what allows you to do that, assign it. Because I have an interest in the property, I can assign it. That's where the bird dog fees come from that you guys all hear for investors. I have equitable interest in the property. Real quick, we'll finish this slide. Because of, we work under what's called the Uniform Vendor Purchaser Risk Act. Uniform Vendor and Purchaser Risk Act, which says the seller is liable to keep the property in the condition that it was when I made an offer. When I close 30 days later, I want it to be the same house I made an offer on. I want the roof there, I want all that stuff there, and if it is damaged in that time frame, the seller is liable for fixing it. When I made my $150,000 offer, there were 4 walls and a roof. Now the day of closing, you tell me there's no roof on the house? That ain't gonna fly like the roof did. All right? Let's change audio.